We come to summer of 1910, also in Des Moines. Armstrong was about age 18 by this point. So I don't know if back then that was kind of like, hey, you're a legal adult now. Get out of the house, go do your own thing, whatever. But um he started working for the Daily Capital newspaper. Now, this was his early starts in advertising. He learned how to create want ads. Okay, so there was all these ladies that needed to rent out apartments at the time. And instead of doing these boring little ads like, oh, it's 2 bedroom, it's brick, it's got this, it's got that, he quickly learned, or he claims, how to sell that product, how to beautify this little apartment to say, this is something you really want. Let me show you this place. It is an incredible place to live. And then he fluffed it up. He fancied it. And so that he got all these people to be like, oh, okay, he sold so many rental property, or like he so many rental properties um that the newspaper agency had sold because of apparently his work. And that is what kicked off his, I don't even want to say career. He had so many business failures, Pats. I mean, I think it was one of the reasons he felt like he had to use somebody else's work, like the Bible, to gain a following. But um, again, that's how he learned to advertise. And he just taught himself for his future ministry and his style of communication that he would ultimately use for his success, so to speak, his
Mm-hmm.
control. So that's where it started. His uncle had convinced him to take this job, and he took all kinds of trips around the US with different places. Again, he had so many business venture failures. He even sold pianos out of Danville, Illinois at one point. I mean, he got off track so often, but he was always teaching himself and he picked up on everything he did. All right. So then we come to 1917. The US enters World War One. Around this time, or like a month later or so, a couple months, is when he married a woman named Loma Isabel Dillon. And I should stress that that is his first wife because he did get married again later on, but we'll discuss that later and all that scandal. But his wife for most of his life, of almost 50 years, was Loma Dillon. And I firmly believe that Armstrong got into religion the way that he did because of his wife, who was his third cousin, by the way. I just wanted to throw that fun little nugget out. I think that was acceptable for the time, but again, yeah, it was a distant cousin affair.
That is still acceptable
So,
now.
and it,
I
what in
know.
Alabama? Is it legal still?
Well, third cousin, second cousin is. It's because the only thing, it's not, I mean, we all think of it as an ick factor, but the reason for it is the genetics. And second cousin is far enough away that it doesn't cause, you know, inbred
Mhm.
problems.
And I think at least until what the late 19th century in the US, marrying your first cousin was even acceptable, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know all the laws, but yeah, that hung on for a while till they were like, maybe we don't want to be breeding people with those issues. 'Cause hemophilia is one of the first ones, I think.
Okay, I don't know anything about that, but again, yeah. Yeah, yeah, that was the thing. So he married Loma, and I feel like Armstrong's family, they were pretty normal, what I would classify as relatively normal people. I mean, his father was never really that stable. They moved around a lot. He had a lot of different jobs. But again, Armstrong was just focused on business and learning and all that. Despite so many failures along the way, he still learned. And he got into the Bible, I think, solely because of Loma. She came from a very strict Christian family. I don't know if they were Quakers as well, but they did not want Armstrong to marry Loma because he was affiliated with people who were known like agnostics and atheists and at the time, and he just had no
Oh
I
no,
know.
not atheists. Those people are
Scandal.
evil and they eat babies.
I know. So tasty. Mm. God, we do all kinds of horrible shit, like control other people. Anyway, yeah, he was determined to marry her, and somehow he ended up. It was kind of fast tracked because World War II had just started like a couple months earlier, and I want to say Armstrong was actually drafted to the war, but then he ended up getting married, and I think if you were married and you have like a baby on the way, which they did at the time, he didn't get sent over, so something like that
Oh,
happened. But
okay.
I think his wife Loma Dillon had some very manipulative, just disgusting parents who I remember one part of his autobiography, if this is to be believed, that there was a man at their general store that his future wife Loma was a little girl, her mom was there, and this man just kind of pat her on the head like, "Oh, you are a pretty young one, aren't you?" And the girl's mother just looked at this man like, "Don't tell her that. It's not good for her." So basically, taking away, stealing that compliment for this little girl. And then apparently, she ran to the nearby mirror and looked at herself. She's like, "But I am pretty, aren't I?" And so I think Loma had very low self-esteem. She was very naive. And I know Armstrong had expressed concerns with that about bringing her to Chicago, where he lived at the time. And she wasn't used to the real world, and she freaked out when she heard ladies talking about quote unquote evil and dirty things, and she freaked out and would call him at work and things like that. So um yeah, there was a lot of influence there. Obviously he loved her and wanted to make her happy, but eventually she convinced him of, religious teachings. But um about a month after they had gotten married, they were still living in Chicago. There was this well-known, highly publicized dream of Loma's, something about Jesus and angels. And you know how that works. Someone that's religious, depending on what religion you're in, you can sometimes see images in your everyday things. You can have dreams that you think make sense or is some sort of vision of the future or prophecy. Well, she told her husband about it. She told Herbert this, and he was not convinced. He was actually kind of embarrassed about it. He's like, okay, well, whatever. But later on, I want to say a few years later, he did become convinced that this was some sort of message for God that he was supposed to take and roll with. Again, this is after all of his failings in business ventures and such, and he wasn't getting anywhere. Well, if he were to just take the Bible and then all of a sudden he's got these people following him, I mean, like, oh yeah, maybe that was a message directly for me. Makes me feel special, makes me feel important. But
Makes
yeah,
me
we'll get
feel
the
elect.
elevated. Yes. See where I'm going with this? Yeah. So over the next few years, Armstrong and his wife Loma have a couple babies, both girls. We have Beverly Lucille and Dorothy Jane. And then the family ends up moving to Eugene, Oregon in 1924. And this, of course, was following several business setbacks. Things were just not working out for Armstrong, despite all of what he taught himself about business. But his parents did live in Salem at the time, which I don't know how close that is to Eugene, but that, yeah, they
They're
moved
about
to,
an hour away from each other.
there you go. Okay. They want to be closer to his family. So I don't know how his parents got out there, but again, his father moved around a lot. So
Mm.
within the next couple years, obviously they're making friends, they're meeting new people in Oregon. Armstrong's wife, Loma, being the very religious woman that she is, she becomes affiliated with some lay leaders of the Church of God, this little organization that I was talking about earlier from Stanbury, Missouri. Their names were Ora and Emma Runecorn. All right. And then Loma, when you get affiliated with certain people, sometimes they can have an effect on you, especially when you're completely vulnerable to hearing that message, which Loma was. And so she became convinced of this whole concept of, Sabbath on Saturday. All right. She was just completely invested in it. And she told Armstrong about it. I think it took him a while to be convinced as well. But eventually he thought, oh, well, that means this is the true church. Okay. And so he got affiliated with these people, the Church of God. Again, the name appealed to him and the whole doctrine of, well, this must be the true church because it talks about Saturday on the seventh day, blah, 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 which I don't even think the Gregorian calendar was in existence at the time. Well, this concept even started, right? Am I wrong about that? I don't know.
I'm
Julius
not
Caesar
sure.
even had a fucking calendar. Okay. But anyway, I'm not going to go way too far back. But okay. Let's just say Armstrong was convinced of it, and he went on what he described as a 3.5 year crazed obsession of researching true doctrine of the Bible. As I mentioned before, he should have started with, is the Bible true to begin with? But no, he jumped straight to the Bible in and of itself, and he wanted to find the true church. So that was his starting point. And he did a lot of his studying at the Multnomah Library in Portland. You're welcome. I know you go there
So
often. It's a
weird.
great library.
It's so
Isn't
strange.
that weird that, like, yeah, he was there for so many years and that's like kicked off this church that we ultimately were raised in, and now you live so close to it.
I moved back to
Anyway,
the area. Weird.
yeah, I know. So he was even baptized in the summer of 1927 at the Hinson Memorial Baptist Church of Portland, Oregon. I don't think that's affiliated with his organization in any way, and I think the reverend who baptized him was a non-Sabbatarian pastor, but whatever. That's where it took place. All right. So around this time when he was doing all this studying, um, he also became like a preacher or a pastor for this church, and he actually gave sermons. So after he was baptized, over the next several years, he started putting out some writings. He used to write for the Bible Advocate. He had his third child, which was also his firstborn son, named Richard. We don't hear about him much because he died at a relatively early age, but we'll discuss that later. Yeah, he put out several writings. It got to be around the time of the Great Depression when he was still living in Oregon. And then he ended up having his fourth child, Garner Ted Armstrong, who would go on to follow him in the Worldwide Church of God amidst later scandal. He also did
Mm.
things like he was an ordained minister with this Church of God. He would do these 15-minute morning devotionals with KORE. And so he was making a name for himself.
Oh, so he got on the radio. So he was trying it out on the radio,
Right.
but with this
Mhm.
other church.
Right. It started with
Okay.
this other church, but you know how these things go. We already discussed how people break off from churches. Armstrong did the exact same thing, and that's how we get to the point where he created his own church. It was called the Radio Church of God initially in either 1933 or 34, depending on when he incorporated it. And he was preaching his message not only in this free literature that he was handing out to people, but also on the radio. People were listening to his voice, and these were the early beginnings of how his actual church got started.